Jewish tribe or kingdom of Khazaria. And the side debate is if we Jews are really Khazars and not Jews. There's a side debate on that. There's an interesting story. And then the following week on the Ramban, Nachmanides, as opposed to Maimonides, Nachmanides, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, the famous disputation at Barcelona, and also a book attributed to him on Jewish sex. Is there such a thing? We'll find out. So that'll intrigue a lot of people. That takes us right up to Pesach, which is March 27th. So that's Shabbat morning. I'm going to keep a very simple Shabbat service because people are rushing to get the seders ready and so on. It's the first time that, if you're vaccinated or if you know who you're having your seder with, you can get together. And if the weather's nice, you can do it outside, you can do it indoors if you're all safe and shot up properly. And the next Shabbat after that will be 7th day Pesach. Yizkor is usually the 8th day, which will be a Sunday. Given the logistics, what I'm going to suggest is that we'll do our Yizkor on Shabbat itself, the 7th day, which is the way it's done in Israel, where they only do one day of the festival, and first and last. So I'm just putting that up, heads up for us. Okay, with that, I'm going to go back to share screen and a warm-up, because I'm playing a Guess Who for us today. I am not telling you who I'm talking about. I'm going to give you hints and talk about the mystery of how come nobody knew who this was. So you're going to have to figure it out with the hints I give you, okay? So here's my first hint. It is a musical hint. By Esther Ofarim. This is a poem by this mystery personality. Oh, I just gave it away. Okay, I just gave away. You didn't see that opening, okay? Mystery personality. Ani Hasa. I am the government minister. Now, this mystery figure, he's only 16 as he's writing this poem, as you see, but he feels like he's 80. The weight of the world is on him, and he is the music instrument for the songs of praise of the wise men and the powerful. So let's find out something about this character. Who is this? That, as I said, this is my mystery figure. Okay, we're going to find out my mystery figure. All right. Last few sessions we spoke about a Rambam. Spent a lot of time on him because he was just such an overwhelming personality. But there were other equally overwhelming personalities who took a different position, either before him or around this time or shortly after, in advance of or in reaction to. So it'll be this mysterious Avicebron, Rabbi Yehuda Levi, and Nachmanides. So here are the three figures. So who is this mystery Avicebron? Sounds like, I don't know, sounds like some European name. So in the Middle Ages, the great European philosophers were very heavily influenced by him. Now, I get into this by saying that many years ago, I was a student living in Jerusalem. I went to Yom Kippur services in a Yemenite synagogue. And just as Musaf ended, that's when we take our break to go out and shmooze and unwind. No, they kept on going. And they started with a section of prayers that I'd never heard of before. And I looked into the machzor, I was surprised to realize they were chanting from an astronomy textbook. It was written as poetry, but it was a discussion of astronomy, nevertheless. So I asked, what on earth was this book on astronomy? What is that doing with Yom Kippur? So I'm going to tell you the story behind it. So this is our mystery philosopher. He's the author of what is known as Fons Vitae, who is known among the Europeans as Avicebron. So Fons Vitae is a great masterpiece of philosophy. It is the Latin term, as it's translated into Latin, the fountain or the source of life. And as I said, he's labeled as Avicebron. Now, this is like the famous story about who really wrote Shakespeare. Did Shakespeare write Shakespeare? Who is this Avicebron? Because nobody ever shows up anywhere with that name in any source. So we start with this book. What was this book? You see this beautiful illustration here. It's an etching that is in one of the printed editions, early editions of his work. And you can see mineral and vegetable life, stars and the moon, the sun, and a fountain, mysterious fountain of life. So it is a dialogue between master and disciple. And it gets its name from the fact that it considers matter and form as the basis of existence and the source of life in everything created. Okay, translated from Arabic. For those who are Arabists, the original title, Yanbu al-Hayat, something a fountain into the life, a fountain of life is pretty close to that. And in the year 1150, the Archbishop Raymond of Toledo asked for it to be translated into Latin because they were very impressed by his teachings. And scholars later on recall and record his importance in the history of philosophy. He's known through citations, for example, in Aquinas in his books. So, and in others. And so what's this Fons Vitae? It is that all created beings are constituted of form and matter, or in medieval philosophy, extension and matter. This is basically philosophy up till the 18th century, 19th century even. And this is true of the physical world. I'm going to ignore reading the Latin for you. I tried to translate with my high school Latin in Google. So corporeal substances, or compound substances, where there are multiple entities, and also spiritual world, which also has a substance to it, but it's a simple entity rather than a compound entity. So that all existence has a physical presence as well as within it. All right, there is then the first substance, which is God, the God above all. Then substance, matter, that supports 9 categories, broken down into 9 categories. And matter and form are always and ever in a relationship of forbearing, aiding, and substratum and property. All right, so much for the philosophical terms. Basically, what we're saying, or he's saying, is unlike Maimonides, that there is matter, the material world, and the spiritual world too are completely separate. He is saying that the matter and the spiritual are actually one. That the spiritual also has a form and a substance to it. Spinoza will pick up from this and say that all is God, pantheism, all is God. Okay, so that's the key point. This idea that there is a matter that expands through the universe also continues until the end of the 19th century, with the question of how is light spread, and the presumption is that there is a matter called ether through the universe, through which light is able to spread, until the famous experiments that led to Einstein's theories, which showed that there was nothing there. Okay, whole different problem. Okay, so what's his impact? Well, the main influence on what is called scholasticism. It's a medieval school of philosophy. It was a method of analysis, dialogue, a particular method of dialogue. And it dominated medieval universities from 1100 to 1700. This is a method of thinking and analysis until the beginnings of the modern era. So look in the Christian world. It is impossible to understand philosophy of the 13th century without understanding Fons Vitae and its influence. He was considered to be a Christian philosopher and a source of great debate between the Franciscans and the Dominicans. The Franciscans, as a school of thought in the Catholic Church, Platonists in their thinking, led by Duns Scotus, who backed this Fons Vitae completely, and the Dominicans, led by Albertus Magnus and Thomas Aquinas, who were influenced by Aristotle. And they were very concerned. They saw too much influence from this Arabic, maybe the spectrum of being Jewish philosopher, on Christian doctrine, right? Big fight back and forth because of him. So he's translated into Latin. His ideas are incorporated into the teachings of these great philosophers. William Alvarn refers to him definitely as a Christian, and he is unicus omnium philosophantium nobilissimus, the noblest, the most unique and noblest of all philosophers. Look at that praise that he gets. And this universality of matter appears in Duns Scotus, who brings this idea from Fons Vitae, the materiality of spiritual substances. And it goes on into Christian philosophy, influences later philosophers down to Giordano Bruno, talks about the Moor, Avicebron. So he knows he's not a Christian, he knows he's a Moor, North African, which means he must be Muslim Arab. Bruno is important for those of us who study science because he is the Catholic priest who got in trouble with the church because he backed Copernicus. The universe, the sun is at the center of the universe, not the earth. Okay, so go ahead. So now we come to the question, right? Who is that master philosopher? It was unraveled in 1846. The Jewish scholar Solomon Monk, who himself is a very interesting and peculiar character, a tremendous thinker in his own right. So he discovered in the Bibliothèque Nationale, National Library of France, Paris, Hebrew manuscripts. He saw work by Shem Tov Palquera. And in it, he had manuscripts in Hebrew. And as he read the manuscripts in Hebrew, he recognized the translation or the original of a Latin manuscript of the Fons Vitae, of Avicebron, word for word. And then he realized, based on the language and that this was based on the Arabic original. So the Fons Vitae, the Hebrew was a translation, the Arabic was a translation. And he was the one who proved that then this Avicebron, or Avicebron, who was presumed always to be a Christian scholar, was the Jewish scholar Ibn Gvirol. So here's a sample of that manuscript that he had found, one of the pages from this Shem Tov Palquera. Well, now how did we get to who is this Ibn Gvirol? Right? You saw the poem? She had a giveaway. She was singing a poem from Ibn Gvirol when he was 16, the song that I introduced. So he is the great Spanish poet, philosopher, and moralist, born in Malaga, Spain around 1021, died around 1058 in Valencia. No, didn't live a long time. He's practically a contemporary of Rashi. And Rashi is so powerful for us, but Rashi has no clue about philosophy. They're not distance-wise, maybe 500 miles apart, but in terms of the philosophical levels, Rashi, for all his brilliance, had no clue about this kind of thinking. That's the difference between the Ashkenazic and the Sephardic world at this time. It is called by Gretz the Jewish Plato, and another scholar, the most original philosopher among the Jews and the Arabs. Between the Jews and the Arabs, the most original. It was more original than Maimonides, he would say. So how do we get Avicebron? Well, his name is Shlomo ibn Gvirol. Ibn Gvirol, Ibn Gebirol, Aven Gebirol, Aven Gebrol, Aven Sebrol, Avicebrol, Avicebron. You see how, like broken telephone, you ever played the game? You whisper a word in somebody's ear and it goes around the circle and another message comes out completely. That's with his name. So we know relatively little about Ibn Gvirol himself. His parents died while he was a child. You saw the poem he wrote, that song, 16, the age of 16. By 20, he wrote a major Hebrew grammar, alphabetic acrostic, 400 verses divided into 10 parts. Man was a major linguist. Father, we may say, the father of the revival of correct Hebrew. Wrote attacks on other peoples and broke away from the concept of the piyut as we knew it and renewed Hebrew poetry as poetry, using the kinds of poetry now beginning to come into the Middle East and the Mediterranean world and into the Renaissance, into Europe. So he was a cantankerous character, perhaps. He was getting in trouble with a lot of authorities. So he was wandering from place to place. From Malaga, he ended up in Valencia and several other places in between. And so he died relatively young. You see 1058 or 1059, maybe about, 30 years at most, right? Very young, but brilliant. That's the price of brilliance. So here, Malaga, they set up a statue in his honor. The most excellent city hall erected this plaque for the 900th anniversary of Aben Gvirol, poet and philosopher from Malaga. Right? And here, a very pensive figure. And then in Caesarea today, Caesarea today in Israel, there's a beautiful statue of him, Ibn Gvirol. This one, a much more formalized posture. This one, much more pensive. I think as artwork goes, this one's a more intriguing one. Reminds me of Dante's statue in Florence. So, what's his importance then? His importance. Ibn Gvirol was the first teacher of Neoplatonism in Europe. In terms of his importance, this from the Encyclopedia Judaica, Jewish Encyclopedia of a century ago, one of the greatest works done with great scholars. And so the author says, Philo, we go back to the first real Jewish philosopher, Philo of Alexandria. He orientalized European philosophy, he took the Greek philosophy, and he gave it a Jewish flavor. And that was the foundation of Christianity. 1,000 years later, Gvirol occidentalized the Greco-Arabic philosophy. He took that which now the Arabs had taken from the Greeks and occidentalized it. He neutralized it, gave it a form that would make it universal. So he says what's interesting is that the teachings of both Philo and Gvirol were ignored by us Jews, but they exerted a considerable circle, Philo in the establishment of Christianity and Gvirol upon the philosophies of medieval Christianity. So what is interesting is that Gvirol in his writings, he did not see philosophy as a handmaid of theology, which was classic medieval thinking, but philosophy was philosophy, and his philosophic work is absolutely pure philosophy without any theology in it. So there are no quotes from rabbis, no quotes from the Bible, not even a single word or phrase that is a rabbinic phrase. And that's why Jews didn't read him, also because they were going to Aristotle in their influences, but why the Christians or the Arabs could accept him, because it was so completely neutral. So completely neutral. So he wrote some other things. He wrote a very important ethical treatise. a treatise on the improvement of moral qualities. His contemporaries or later rabbis talked about him. Rabbi Solomon the Little Hakatan spread such a fragrance of song as was never produced by any poet either before or after him. The poets who succeeded him strove to learn from his poems. They were unable to reach even the dust of his feet as regards the power of his figures and the force of his words. If he had lived longer, he would surely have accomplished wonderful things in poetry, but was snatched away when still young. His life was extinguished before he had completed his 30th year. Imagine that. Here's a man, he's influencing world philosophy, and he's not even 30. So those of you who came on right at the beginning of the service, I had somebody singing this. It is found in the Conservative Prayer Book, the 1980 edition. It is the one that we have in our benches in the synagogue. The New Lev Shalem, I did not see it in there, but they introduced it as part of the Shacharit. And this was Shacha Avakeshcha Tzuri Miskavi. So if you were here at the beginning, or you go back to Facebook or YouTube, you can go back and you can hear the singers singing and actually with hand motions enhancing upon the song in a very Spanish style. At the dawn I seek you, refuge rock sublime. So let's look at this book that surprised me when I walked into the synagogue on Yom Kippur to find Jews singing astronomy. So he, as a philosopher, was forgotten among Jews. Didn't know that he was a philosopher. But the poet was very much alive and very much copied. And this Keter Malchut basically is taking his philosophy and putting into poetic form, a Hebrew poetic form of some of the ideas that are in his philosophy, Fons Vitae, Fountain of Life. So it's a philosophical and ethical hymn in rhymed prose. He describes the universe as composed of spheres, one within the other. A hymn of glory of God, both the material and spiritual world, combined with ethical and religious thoughts. As I say, it is part of the Yom Kippur liturgy, also in not just the Yemenite Jews, but also many Sephardic communities. This is a fragment of manuscript, handwritten copy of one of the phrases. Okay, I'm not going to try to read it. It's very hard, but here is another manuscript, an illuminated manuscript. We're getting to the later Middle Ages, nice copy work, and you can see they had more luxury of illustrating them beautifully. So now, here from a printed machzor, early printed machzor, 5413 makes it about 350 years ago. And those of you who know Spanish, Orden de Rosh Hashanah y Kippur, right? The order of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, traducido en español, translated into Spanish with new commentaries, and Keter Malchut is in it, right? Y otras cosas. Okay, so as I say, 350 years ago, would put us at 1650. About. Well, so I'm going to give you an example of his Hebrew language and then just go quickly through some sections out of his beautiful Keter Malchut. You can see I've highlighted in yellow the parts that rhyme. So you can see it has a refrain that goes through Ata Echad, Ata Echad, Ata Echad, Ata Echad, right? So he's repeating an opening introduction. Then he has two stanzas, each one rhyming. So it's Ata Echad, Rosh Kol Minyan, Yesod Kol Binyan. You see the An. There are one, the first of every number, foundation of every structure. Then Ata Echad, Yesod Achdutcha Hachmelev Yitmahu, Hilo Yadu Mahu, right? Who and who. Thou art one, and the mystery of thy oneness, the wise of heart are struck dumb, for they know not what it is. Ata Echad, V'Achdutcha Lo Yigrav Lo Yosif, Lo Yachsar Lo Ya'adif, right? If, rhyming. Thou art one, thy oneness shall never be increased nor lessened, it lacketh not, nor doth aught remain over. And continuing, Ata Echad, Lo Ki Echad HaKanui V'Amanui, Lo Yisigucha Ribui V'Shinui, V'Lo Tar V'Lo Kinui. Right? You are one, but not like a unit to be grasped or counted, for every number and change cannot reach thee, thou art not to be visioned, nor to be figured thus or thus. Right? Again, here is a little bit more rhyming in this one. Kinui, Manui, Ribui, Shinui, Kinui. and continues, right? You can see, you get the point. Right? Without one, but to the bound or circumference, can imagination, my imagination would fail me. Therefore, I have said, I will guard my ways lest I sin with the tongue. Thou art one, thou art high and exalted beyond the basement of falling, for how should the one fall? Okay, so you can see again, the echad, ginui, hegioni, lashoni, art echad, minpol, shipol. All right, so this is from a translation by Israel Zangwill. Israel Zangwill was a poet at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, English, British poet, very well respected, but also the author of so much of our translations into English that we use in the Siddur. He's just a wonderful master of the English language and Hebrew. Now, what Ibn Gavriel is doing is following the science of his day. Remember, the science is ever changing. We tend to think, oh, those primitives were very, very bright. They just didn't have all the tools that we have, but given the tools they have, they did a pretty good job. So here is, right? So he's building on the Ptolemaic universe. And you know your high school science, Ptolemy said the Earth is at the center, and then the sun and the moon and so on revolve around. Till came Copernicus and said, no, the sun is at the center. And then Galileo had his famous moment where he was called upon by the Inquisition. How dare he support Copernicus? And he was forced to retract it. If you remember this famous story. And then under his breath, he says, but it still moves, talking about the Earth. So here is from an Arabic translation of Ptolemy's work. And you can see how Ptolemy was trying to solve a mathematical problem in making the universe work. Here's the Earth at the center, and there's a sphere, one of the planets in the sphere. Planets don't move in a nice, neat, even circle. So mathematically, Ptolemy had to try to figure out mathematically, how could you get the circle to move evenly when it's not moving evenly? So he comes up with the idea of a circle inside a circle. Marcella, this is for you as a mathematician, maybe. It's a geometric solution to the problem. And if the planet is moving in a circle inside the orbit, that would help solve the problem of why we see the planet sometimes this way and this way, farther and closer and so on. So what Ptolemy did in his day was make a very good mathematical model that was a good working model, and you could make very accurate predictions about the planetary positions, given the tools that they had. He's around 100 or 150. Not bad. Nobody was talking about the Earth being flat. Nobody was talking about that in his model. Nobody was talking about the Earth standing on the back of a turtle, as was true 2,000 years before that. It was a very sophisticated system, just based on what they had, the information they had. So Ibn Gavriel is going to use that system and now add a moral lesson to it. So we start looking at the Earth. Who shall utter thy mighty deeds, for thou madest a division of the ball of the earth into twain, half dry land, half water. Oh, notice ball of the earth. The Hebrew was kadur haaretz. Nobody was talking about the earth being flat, that you would fall off the edge of the earth. Forget what they told you in school about Columbus, that nobody before him was afraid would do it because they would fall off the edge of the earth. They just didn't do it because they didn't have the tools. But they knew it was round, right? And did surround the water with the sphere of air, in which the wind turneth and turneth in its goings and resteth in its circuits, and didst encompass the air with a sphere of fire, right? We have this assumption. Here's earth, there is air, above the air is a sphere of fire. That is between the earth and then the other elements. And the foundations of these four winds are but one foundation, the source one, from it they issue and are renewed, and from whence it was separated, and thus became four heads. Four elements, the Greek four elements: earth, air, fire, water. Earth, water, fire, air. Yeah, okay, four elements. And his proof in Genesis, it talks about the Garden of Eden, and four rivers come out of the Garden of Eden. It was separated, become four heads. That is now his proof that there are four elements in the universe. Okay, now what about the moon? Who shall tell thy praise? For thou madest the moon the chief source whereby to calculate appointed times and seasons and cycles and signs for days and the years. Her rule is the night until the coming of the fixed hour, when her brightness shall be darkened, shall clothe herself with a mantle of gloom. Right? She's dark at night, dark in the day, covered in gloom, because from the light of the sun is her light. Right? They're clear. They understand the moon is not a source of light. The moon is just a reflection. The medievals understood it very well. And should it hap on the night of the 14th that both of them stand on the line of the dragon, so that cometh between them, then the moon shall not convey her light, and her illumination shall be extinguished. To the end that all the peoples of the earth shall know that they are the creatures of the Most High, and however splendid they be, there's a judge above them to humble and exalt. Remember the story about the ancients believing that a dragon swallowed the moon? Well, the dragon is the constellation, the name given to the constellation that comes in position when the moon is blocking the sun. When the earth is in a position that it's blocking the light of the sun to the moon, so that even though it's a full moon, the moon is dark. A lunar eclipse, I've seen that. It's a fascinating thing. You still see light, but it's much dimmed, right? So nobody really knew there was a dragon anymore, right? But they understood it's the position of the sun and the moon. And the same thing then, nevertheless she shall live again, right? Time goes on. Why is that? Because we as human beings have to understand the moon is not a power. The ancients thought the moon was a power to herself. No, the moon is not a power to herself, not the goddess. Who's the goddess of the moon? Athena, right? No power. Nevertheless, she shall live again after a fall and be resplendent again after a darkness, and when she's in conjunction with the sun at the end of the month, if the dragon shall be between them. And as the dragon is the constellation, it's the northernmost constellation, right? So it is between the Big Dipper and Little Dipper. It has shifted its position because the Earth shifts, but at that time it was the northernmost. And both shall stand in one line. The moon shall stand before the sun like projecting blackness, and shall hide the light thereof from the sight of all beholders. You know that all who behold may know the sovereignty is not with the hosts and legions of heaven. There's a master over them, obscuring and irradiating. All right, from behind height, he keepeth yea and the heights beyond. And they that imagine that the sun is their God shall be ashamed of their imaginings, for the words are then tested, and shall know 'tis the hand of the Lord hath done this. Sun hath no power, and his alone is the rule who can darken its life, sending it to a slave of its slaves, a beneficiary of its own kindly glow, to becloud its radiance, to cut off the abominable idolizing thereof, and let the sun be removed from sovereignty. In other words, as in opposition to those who assume the sun is a power in and of itself, the sun god, Apollo. No. Its own slave, the moon, because the moon doesn't have any real light of its own, it is the simple moon that can block the light of the sun. So to teach you that the moon is no power in and of itself. Right? Going back to the idea of Abraham and the tradition who says that the sun disappears, the moon disappears, everything has its place and has no power of its own. Right? So this is the solar eclipse. Again, no dragon, it's just the moving of the moon. We're going to see a fairly sophisticated introduction to astronomy that he wants to teach, and people are singing this for Yom Kippur. Now we go ahead. Well, what about the sun? Who shall understand thy secret? Thou hast encompassed the sphere of the shining with the fourth sphere, which is the sun that completeth his circuit in a perfect year. Body 170 times greater than that of the earth, according to the indications and devisings of the intellect. All right. We now know it's only 109 times. Not bad. Not bad. Okay. An earth-based model. Not bad measure. And a portion of light to all the stars of the heavens. Or it's the sun in this vision that gives lights to the other stars, and gives the king salvation and majesty and dominion and awe, reneweth marbles on earth, whether for war or peace, and rooteth up kingdoms, establishing exalted others in this stead. Right? But he's doing all this to the will of the creator who created him in wisdom. Every day prostrates himself before the king, takes his stand in the house of his course. At dawn he raises his head and boweth towards the west. In the evening he goes down. In the morning he returneth. Right? We see the sun as coming and going. It is his worship to God, his praise to God, right? So he's seeing the sun as giving praise to God. And you imagine, like all the medievals, that the stars, the forces, also control our own lives. It's part of the mechanics of the universe. Right? That's how they're watching it. Now, what else? The greatness of the sun, computing days and years, making fruit tree to burden, the green juice. Now, watch this. 6 months he journeys towards the north to warm the air, and the waters, the woods, and the rocks. And he draws nigh to the north, the days grow longer, and the seasons wax, till there's found a place where day is so lengthened that it lasts 6 months, according to confirmed indications. North Pole is dark, 6 months. Who knows that? Nobody went there. That's all through their approximations of information. And then 6 months he journeys towards the south in its appointed courses, till there's found a place where the night is so lengthened that it lasted 6 months, according to proof of searchers. Who knew there was a south? They knew there was a south. Who could know that there was a dark spot? They knew there was a dark spot, right? Winter and summer at the opposite poles. So now we just wrap up here. And he goes into the theme. This is what brings us to take the astronomy and make it religion. He goes to God now. He goes through all the planets and descriptions. And who can approach thy seat? From beyond the sphere of intelligence hast thou established the throne of thy glory. There standeth the splendor of thy veiled habitation. The mystery and foundation thus reacheth intelligence, but comes here to a standstill. Even intellect, which operates throughout the universe. The universe operates a magnificent mechanical computer, we may say. And then it reaches a point where it no longer can reach. Beyond that is God. Right? No man may go up with you. And then he connects it to Yom Kippur. This is why it's in the liturgy. Oh God, I am ashamed and confounded to stand before thee with this my knowledge, that even as the might of my greatness, so is the completeness of my poverty and humbleness. Right? The weakness of my ability. He goes on, you see this. And these are terms that we see in the high holidays liturgy. Right? I am but a clod, a worm, a dust from the ground, wind that fleeteth away and returneth not again. And I'm like an asp, right? A snake, deceitful underneath, uncircumcised of heart, great in wrath, craftsman, sin, etc. Right? He looks at all his faults. He said, what am I? What is my life? What is my might? What is my righteousness? That's a quote from the morning prayer, one of the morning prayers. What am I, right? Naught is the sum of all the days of my being. And he says, then goes on, I know that those who implore favor from thee have for ambassadors their antecedent virtues, right? They have their virtues to go and plead for them and the righteous, but I have no good deeds, right? I have no good deeds. I am shaken and emptied like a striped vine. I have no righteousness, no rectitude. Right? Look at this. He's throwing himself. I have nothing good to say of myself. I said in the introduction from Pirkei Avot earlier, I said, do not look at yourself as wicked. He's doing it. He's looking at himself. Useless, empty, neither serves. Then may it be your will to have mercy upon me, be near me, favor me with the visitation of thy goodwill. Right? He needs, this is an almost Christian conception where he has no deed of value. He needs God's grace. That's a very Christianized conception to come. And then the end, he says, I thank thee, O Lord, that though wroth with me, thine anger is turned away, thou hast comforted me. Thine, O Lord, is loving kindness and all the goodness thou hast bestowed on me, which will bestow me till the day of my death. For all this it behooves me to give thanks to Lord, to glorify, to extol thee. By the mouth of thy creatures, O yield thyself, thy praise. By these howling be thou self-sanctified. Those owning thy unity, cry thou thy oneness. Through those owning thy unity, cry thy oneness. With the lips of thy glorifiers, chant thee thy glory. Exalt thee in rhapsody through thine exalter, supremely upborn of thy worshipper's breath. For amid the gods and their works, O Lord, there's none like to thee and thine. Mi kamocha, right? There's none like unto thee. May the word of my mouth and my heart's true thought, right? Your Lord, son of P, right? There's weaves elements of the liturgy. My heart's true thought, find, O rock and redeemer, the favor sought. All right, there we go. My rock and my redeemer. Again, classic phrases from the Siddur, the favor sought. Well, that leads us to Rehovim Gevirol. A lot of streets in Israel named after him. One of the major thoroughfares in Tel Aviv named after him. Rambam gets a hospital. Maimonides gets the Rambam Hospital in Haifa, and there's a Maimonides in the United States also, but he gets the great Ibn Gvirol Boulevard in Tel Aviv. Okay, so those are thoughts, takeaway from the mysterious author, this unknown Fons Vitae, who it turns out was in our prayer books and in our poetry all along as the great Jewish philosopher and poet. So you can see how we have unusual thinkers, and that we have not been sitting twiddling our thumbs during these 2,000 years of exile, but we've been shaping world civilization without even knowing it. Without even knowing it. So, any questions, any thoughts for this Shabbat? Okay. So
I have a question,
Yes.
Rabbi.
Go ahead.
Yeah, is there any connection between him, Ibn Gabirol, and Averroes, the Muslim philosopher and doctor?
Now, Averroes is an influence on the Rambam, and I think Averroes is more Aristotelian, and he is Platonic, Neoplatonic. That's a whole different lecture. So what does it mean by Aristotelian? What is Platonic, Neoplatonic? Aristotle, basing from you're working out of pure thought, pure reason to come to your conclusions, whereas in Platonic thought you have preset ideas that are fundamental, and then you build out of them. And it's working up instead of working down. That's simple.
Period?
Huh?
Ibn Gabirol and Averroes, are they from the same?
I don't know exactly. They'd be close. I would guess. So Ibn Gvirol is the year 1000 something, early 1000s. Averroes, I'm not sure when. But probably close in time. Yeah, they're all working out of the same intellectual climate. It's very simple. Like modern Jewish writers are working out of the European intellectual climate, the American intellectual climate. We take it for granted, and so they did it. So in those days, yeah.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Well, astronomy was essentially started with the
There's the Babylonians get the credit. Yeah.
No, but it did a lot of progress with the Greeks. And then the Greeks brought it to the Middle East, and at that time, astronomy progressed a lot in the Middle East in the years 600, 500, something like this.
Yeah.
And Jewish people were connected with them at that time.
Very much so. Very much so. There was no harsh, in terms of philosophical writing, there was no harsh demarcation line between Jewish and Arabic thinkers, Islamic thinkers. Europe was far behind. And again, keep in mind, Europe proper, the Greek philosophers and so on, they were an essential element of the Roman Empire, but to the east part of the empire. I don't think that much of their thinkings got to Europe proper, even though it was under the Romans for a long time, but those are the Western Romans. So they never had that development, and they didn't catch up then. What literature they had, there were a few monks and some monasteries that kept some of the literature, but it was the Arabs who kept it up without any question. But
also the Jews of Spain had a lot of influence from the Jews from Iraq.
In Talmudic thought, yes.
And probably around there was astronomy.
So there's formal philosophy beginning in Mesopotamia, Rabbi Saadia Gaon, who precedes them by a century, the first formal philosopher. But again, they're working hand in hand. It's like when they're talking and debating, when it's we, in these discussions among Jewish philosophers, they talk about we, they talk about Muslims, they talk about Jews, they talk about Christian philosophers. It's all we. It's all one, and they're all sharing the same line of thinking, very close. So what is interesting is, hey, look, something simple, the number system, right? So
Yes.
the number system, we call them Arabic numerals. They're really from India, right? And so the Arabs who are traveling back and forth bring that into the Middle East. Well, who's doing numbers in Europe? Jews are the people doing numbers in Europe. Jews come from land of Palestine through Italy into Central Europe, the Rhineland and so on. They bring with them the knowledge of measurement because they're coming in as economists. They're coming in as managers into Central Europe. That's how they're coming in at this point. When they were in Italy, they were very, very poor, but gradually they became more sophisticated. But they had this Talmudic knowledge. A lot of it involves mathematics. So they come into Europe and bring mathematics, measurements, primarily measurements of fields, areas, spaces. Norman the Conqueror, was it William the Conqueror, brings his Jewish advisors in with him to establish the English economy that he's going to set up. There's a theory even that you can see this very, it's all under. In England, there's something called the Star Chamber, which has a very important place in English history. A lot of the revolutions, a lot of the overheavals of kings and so on, they revolve around things going on in the Star Chamber. So the question is, well, where's the word star come from? Did it have a star shape? And say, no, it came from the Hebrew word shtar, notes, deeds, debts, mortgages, because that's where they kept the banking notes that the people owed, that the king owed to the Jewish financiers and so on, or the others owed. So that's the theory behind it, right? So there's a tremendous play, right?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I wish everybody Shabbat Shalom. Okay. And
Thank you very much.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Shalom, everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. Shalom.
Interesting. Shabbat